Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, welcome guests. 1989 was the best year of my life. That was the year where in January I spent 23 days in the Soviet Union. By the spring I graduated college, and after that I asked myself, if I had 6 months to live, what would I do? I'd travel. And that's what I did. I did 10 days in Hawaii, 2 weeks in Alaska, 4 weeks driving around the United States, visit all the national parks, a month in Europe doing Eurail, and then I bought a ticket around the world. And it's when I bought this ticket around the world that the first place that I was going to stop was Israel, and more specifically, Jerusalem. Why Jerusalem? Because it was a historical city, and it was also a city in conflict. And I wondered, what is it like to be a city in conflict? That's what I thought. And so I decided I was going to go there, and in the next few minutes I'm going to share with you 2 experiences that happened to me while I was in the city of conflict in Jerusalem in December of 1989. The first experience, wherever I went there seemed to be a lot of weapons. This was 1989 when there weren't a lot of weapons here in the United States. But I walked into a bar and was shocked. I saw 5 young men with machine guns strapped to their back and banana clips on their belts. I'm like, where do you see that in America? And then I was walking down the street, and you can't really see it here, but a guy was on a date with an M16 strapped to his back. I was like, wow, okay. And then I went to a bus stop, and there was all these soldiers, all armed, waiting to get on the bus. And I remember seeing this really attractive Israeli woman, young, and I thought that was a pocketbook she had. No, that was an Uzi. I was like, what? You know, kind of like this woman right here. And wherever I went, whether it was a checkpoint or it was just walking along the streets, there was just weapons everywhere. And if that wasn't disconcerting enough, I'd hear the F-15 slide by. Just to let you know that they were there. And on the last day I was there, I was at a bus stop, and I heard all this commotion. And so I went out in the street to see what was going on. And I saw the police blowing out whistles because someone had left something out in the street. And they were clearing the street. And it looked like almost like the Coliseum. Everyone was watching out in the street. And out of nowhere comes this guy in like a Honda Civic. And he jumps out, he pops his trunk, jumps out of his car. He kind of looked like a young John Mason. And he came out of the car and he went to his trunk. And he opened it up. And he put all his bomb gear on like in the Hurt Locker. And he walked over to the package. And he looked at it, and it was probably someone's old underwear from wherever. And he just gave a big thumbs up to the police. And they blew their whistle. And then everyone just kind of walked back to the normal. You know, and just started driving. That was the reality that I came into in Jerusalem in December of 1989. And I was like blown away by that. So that was my first experience. My second experience, in the early morning of the second day I was there, I decided I was going to go walk around the old city. It's like a big fortress. And I went into the Christian quarter, and then I decided to go walk into the Jewish quarter. Those are all bullet holes at the Jaffa Gate right there. And I thought, wow. So I walked through that door right there, and I went straight to the Wailing Wall. This is the most holiest site in Judaism. What people don't realize is that right above that is the Dome of the Rock, which is the 3rd most holiest site for Muslims. Now, when I went through the checkpoint, I noticed everyone was looking at me. Because if you notice, I'm kind of dark. So all the Israelis thought I was Hebrew. All the Arabs thought I was Arab. So it kind of confused people. See, I always didn't have this gray hair. I used to look like this. Okay? Used to have very dark features. So when I went to the Dome of the Rock, most people left going towards the Jewish quarter, but not me. I'm there for the adventure. It was still very tense there. I decided to walk through the Muslim quarter because everyone thought I was Arab. They could tell I was American, and I would go into the shops, into the mosques, and they would just keep looking at me, and I could tell they were looking at me going, he's either an Arab American or a stupid American. I knew I wasn't Arab American. And it wasn't until I went to the last mosque that I go, no. And I saw this guy with all, you know how they had all the wraparound and stuff, and I was like, I started feeling really uncomfortable because it was just very tense at that time. So I was like made a beeline for Damascus Gate, and I got out of there. But here's the interesting, when I got out of the gate and I started walking around the old city, I realized something. There was a huge a historical peace march going on that I had no idea. 25,000 Israelis and Palestinians were in a show of unity, were to hold hands around the old city. It was spectacular. And there had all these demonstrations and learn about peace and things like that. And there was this brand new TV station that was interviewing people, you know, called CNN. And I remember they were coming up to all the people around me, and they were about to come to me, but I didn't want them to interview me because I hadn't had Toastmasters yet, so I felt very uncomfortable. So at that point, I was getting a little tired. And I thought, I'm going to walk back to the hostel. And I get to the hostel, and there's nobody there, except for the cook. And the cook comes out and goes, looks at me and goes, did I hear you were in the United States Marine Corps? I said, as a matter of fact, I was. He goes, you weren't at that stupid peace march, were you? I go, me? Not me. He goes, do you want to learn about Israeli history? I go, that would be great. So he offered me back into the kitchen where he was cooking his meal. And I thought it was really weird because he locked the door. That's really weird. Took a note of that, situational awareness. Well, I realized why. Because he was a warmonger. And it was not very popular at that time to be a warmonger. This guy was way out there. You know, a good Arab was a dead Arab. War is better than sex. I mean, he was woo-hoo-hoo. But he was in the Yom Kippur War as well as the Six-Day War. And he was a wealth of really interesting information. But the one thing that I found really interesting that he said, you Americans all want peace in the Middle East. And that's easy for you to say. He goes, and then all of a sudden he took out a map of Israel. He said, here's Israel. This little yellow thing right there. He said, these are all, this is the warmonger talking. He goes, see all these countries? They want to annihilate us. And all you Americans want to give the Palestinians the West Bank. But here's what happens when you give them the West Bank. They'll try to cut us in half and they'll just annihilate us. Kind of like they tried during the Yom Kippur War. I'm like, no, that got me thinking a little bit. He goes, it's easy for you Americans to say that because look where you live. You got the oceans on each side of you and you got Canada and Mexico. He goes, what if you had the Soviet Union and China and all they did was talk about annihilating you every day? Would you give them land? Would you be feeling comfortable? That kind of made me think. So in that one day, I got to hear about the peace version of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the morning. And in the afternoon, I got to hear about the warmonger version. And it was tremendously interesting. So when I flew around the world, the most interesting place I went, I felt, was Jerusalem. Because I got to have the experience of seeing what a city in conflict was really like. And also to learn about the peace side and the warmonger side of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So now whenever I see Israel or Jerusalem in the news, I have a little bit better feeling of what's going on because I've been there and I've heard both sides. So I think everyone should travel because that's one way to learn about what's really going on in the world so that you can make your decisions on what you feel about a certain subject. And I think we'd all have a better place if we all traveled to different places. Mr. Toastmaster.